Well, hello friends. Welcome back to my sewing room, and we are here for number 10 in the hometown blocks, and we are going to, this is what number 10 looks like, okay? And I'm going to show you all of these 5-inch size, 5.5 size now, but 5-inch finished size of this number 10 block that I have done so far. This block is really fun. It consists of, let's see, one, two, three, 4 different prints, and then the background. So you can do something matchy-matchy like this, like a pink and a red, and then 2, teals or something, or you can do something with just one pop of a different color, or all different. I'll find one with all different colors. Kind of like, well, that's almost all different colors. There is 2 teals in there. But it's just kind of fun to grab your scraps and do something. Here's one with 4 completely different colors there. So I have sewn 16 of these. I don't know how many I've just shown you here. 4, 6, 14. So 2 must be up on the design wall with the other blocks. And so we'll talk about that at the end. I know I told you in my last video a few days ago that I talked to you about the yardage for the background and stuff like that. And so I'm going to. And so let me just set these up here. And I am going to set one right here just to kind of see what it looks like. But the reason I haven't shown you the 10-inch one yet, I'll show you those in just a second, is because I'm going to sew a 10-inch block today. I just thought it would be kind of fun to change it up and sew a 10-inch block instead of the 5-inch. But let me show you. This is what we did last time. This is number 9. And I'm not going to make a mistake by saying what numbers they are, so I'm just going to show them to you. But these are the tutorials that we've done so far. And I'm excited because, as you know, if you've been following along, there are 10 different hometown blocks for the quilt, for our sew-along quilt. And I've just been sewing extra because I'm going to be making a king-size quilt for my bed. Okay, so that's that so far. And so here's what I'm talking about. Here's the quilt. And so there's 10 different blocks, and then the same 10 different blocks, just in different fabrics and in different order in the next rows. And so that means 40 of those. But instead of, so I sewed the 4 for there, so I made the 40 for the quilt, and we're still, doing that sew along, but we're nearing the end, the very end. But now that that's done, I can concentrate on doing my bed quilt after I finished this last tutorial for this block, okay? And so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the cutting for both sizes, but I do, again, have the cutting for both sizes in my video description. So for the 5-inch size, you're going to need, for the background, you're going to need 16 1.5-inch squares. Then you're going to need 8 1.5-inch squares for that, and 4 1.5-inch squares for the corners, and then 1 1.5-inch square for that. And then these rectangles are 1.5 by 2.5. Okay, so that's the 5-inch block cutting. And for this, let me lay these up here. I kind of got a little head start, and so I'll explain that in a minute. But for this, you're going to need 16 background squares, obviously, same amount, but they need to be 2.5, okay? And for the 4 outside corners, for the easy corner triangles, you're going to need 4 2.5-inch squares. So basically, we're just working with 2.5-inch squares instead of 1.5. And so you're going to need 8 2.5-inch squares, and then you're going to need 1 for the center, a 2.5-inch square, and then a 2.5 by 4.5 rectangle, okay, for that. But I wanted to show you this block, what it looks like. This is what I do when I get to this point. I mean, this is a block within itself. You could certainly make many 10-inch blocks and many 5-inch blocks just this way, and I think that's really cute. But I kind of wanted to show you, again, my method that I've been showing you throughout this series, that I form the 4 patches first, and then I do the easy corner triangles. So I don't need to add an easy corner triangle here, see, because that remains a full square. But I will need to take these 8 leftover background squares that I haven't used yet and do those like this, okay, in that direction. And so when you're laying out this block, you want your backgrounds to go kind of like in an X like that. And so that's what we're going to do next. Is I'm going to be sewing with Miss Millie. I'm going to set these up here just for a minute so that I don't lose them and I don't knock them on the floor or something when I'm sewing. And so what I'm going to be doing is just, like I said, taking these down, and it's going to be on the prints. I'm not going to sew a background to a background. I'm going to be sewing it to a print. So I'm just going to line it up right here. I'm going to start sewing at the corner here and then follow this corner right here. Also, one thing I wanted to tell you was, so instead of the 2.5 inch trim it ruler for this, we're going to be using the 4.5 inch size. And so what, you know, before I add these, I should be holding these up here to make sure. I think if I hold it up like that, you can see, right? So see, that is exactly 4.5. Great. Okay, so we'll use this afterwards too, but I always like to check it first. If I pick it up, you know, think that it looks off or I'm a little worried about it, then I'll just pick up that ruler and just take a quick look. I usually don't put it up in the air like that to show you, but you know, I'll just lay it down here. I just have it here. I hurry and put my block down right there, and I just lay it on there and make sure it looks good. So it's, you know, it's a, you know, fairly quick process to do that. And it saves mistakes and keeps my block accurate. So okay, let's do this last one. And I'm simply going to cut these apart, and I don't have to press or trim yet because I can go ahead and sew on the other side because it doesn't cross over into any other seam. Sometimes when I'm doing certain units for other blocks, I will have to trim and press it open, or, you know, before I can add the other one, because it might cross over into that seam. So yeah, I just had Mr. Honey switch out my machine last time, and for Miss Millie. And so Millie is named after my grandma who taught me to quilt. And so it's like each one of them, it's like having an old friend, you know what I mean? When he pulls them out, he pulls them in from the barn, and I really never know what color I'm getting. He'll just pull it in and open the case, and I'm like, okay, that's what I'm sewing with now. And it's pretty fun. Okay. I'll line up this last one. Okay. Then I've been working on my 2.5 inch squares bonus quilt, one print and one background, and I'm just sewing them together. So by the time I'm finished with this king size quilt, I'm sure I'll have another bonus quilt blocks ready to go too, and I'll show and tell you all about that. Okay, so I'm going to come over here, and I just think it's easier to set the seams before I trim them, but it really doesn't matter. You can trim them first and then set the seams, but I think it's just as easy. Maybe it helps me to see that they're pressed flat, and I know that they're not going to get distorted or anything because I've done it after I trimmed. Okay. And then I simply just trim these off. use your mat and rotary cutter. If you're doing a lot of these all at one time, you might want to just pull your mat out and you know, do it that way with a ruler. But I don't know, usually when I'm filming or just doing a few blocks at a time, most of the time I just grab my large sewing scissors and trim them off. Now, as far as leftovers, if this, let me grab this ruler. I'm not going to save these because this is my rule of thumb. If I can get a 1.5 inch square out of there, which obviously I cannot, this is 1.5 inches, then I'll go ahead and trim 1.5 inch squares and throw them in my basket. But I've just learned that I'm not going to use them this small, and so I pick and choose what I'm going to save, and that's how I chose a long time ago, is if it's bigger than 1.5 inch squares, then I will save it. And I get a lot of scraps that way. You'd be surprised at all the quilts. All these 1.5 by 2.5 inch bonus squares are from that. And, you know, I get a lot out of that, and I make a lot of blocks and a lot of scrappy quilts that way. So I do save it that way. All right, so I'm going to press these open because I'm going to add another, you know, another seam on the other easy corner triangle. And so I want to press these open, and then the very last one I'm going to press towards the triangle. I'll show you that when I get to that point. So I'm just rolling right there. I'm going to set it this way so the clapper fits easily on there. And I'm just making sure that this seam stays open. There we go. And using a nice hot iron. And, you know, I could use two like this if I wanted to. Let me set those there. And even though my blocks are 10 inches, I still press open. I still like the way that they lie flat. I'm going to put this up here so I have more room so you can see in this ironing area. Someone asked me how I in such a small area, when it's time for me to do bigger quilt blocks, and when I'm pressing rows together of quilts, how do I do that in this little area? Well, this is just my little area for sewing blocks and things. I have my big ironing board on my counter that's huge. And if you've watched my video where I talk about my vintage irons and my DIY ironing boards, how I cover my ironing boards, how I made this one, I do all different sizes for all different tasks. So I have probably a dozen different ironing boards, and some are on legs and some are not, and some are, you know, more portable than others, but the largest one I have is on my counter. I think it's something like 24 inches deep by 60 inches long, or if not longer, it may be 72 inches long. I can't remember, but I know I'll tell you in the, you know, that I do tell you in the video. So, okay, there's that one. I've got this last one. Now, don't laugh at me, but sometimes I do this, especially on retreat. I just go ahead, and why not? Why can't I do it on the clapper, right? I use that as my little ironing surface. And a lot of times when I say I do it on retreat, it's because I have such a small ironing area. But look how nice and flat that is on top of the clapper. And then, here, I'll just grab this one out of the window and put on top of it. Okay, and then it's like a cute little quilt sandwich there in between the clappers. And it really, you know, lies flat. Let me see. I better keep these small ones out. I don't know. I can switch them out if I need to. I keep those up there to keep my curtains away so y'all don't think I'm going to catch my curtains on fire. But this is what this looks like. Okay. I'm going to let that one, that cool pretty fast, actually. And then I've got this one to uncover. All right. So now I've got that. And so then you could put them just like that, right? And remember, now they look like little bow ties, right? Or the little pasta bow ties. Remember the background square. It's the square, not the triangle that goes in the center, but I'm going to show you something in a minute. So there's that. So there's a block within itself, right? So that's cute too. You could do that as well. Or you could go ahead and put them this way with the triangles, with the full square backgrounds that way. Just showing you some options. This is how I design with my design boards a lot. And so you could go that way and sew a block. But this particular block, this block number 10, I'm going to turn them back this way. And then I'm going to add, I'm going to take these and just add the easy corner triangle right on the corners there. And I like how that looks. It just gives you an opportunity to use more of your squares, but it also makes the block super cute. And when you put those blocks together, next to sashing or just next to another block, it forms a secondary design. And so when I'm adding these onto the corners, I just make sure that, you know, it can be either corner. It doesn't matter. I just make sure that it's on the background square. And then when these are added, then we'll put these up to the 4.5 inch, trim it, and trim down what we need to, if we need to, just to keep everything on the up and up and straightened out. So I'm following the center line here on my Seam So Easy guide. I showed you a few videos ago on how to put it onto your machine. I just use washi tape, which is a temporary tape, so you can easily lift it off when you're changing the bobbin. For all the patchwork I do, I'm not changing the bobbin a ton of times because I use Aurifil, and it's a very strong, thin thread, and that means I can wind a lot more on my bobbin too. So that's a bonus for me. Okay, I'm going to grab another background and another print. Working on my bonus quilt at the same time. Okay, I'm going to cut these apart. I'm going to set my seams over here. Flatten that top thread and bobbin thread together, kind of squish it together there. And then I'm going to trim them off. That's going to be the same size square that we already. So usually just, you know, because I'm working with 2.5 inch squares, I know that they're too small for me to save already. I don't have to measure them. I just wanted to show you, but I do know that when I'm working with 3.5 inch squares, that those are big enough for me to save the trim offs. And so I save those and cut them into squares. Now I used to, a long time ago, you know, if these still aren't big enough for me personally, but I would sew along here and then open them up and, you know, so that they were half square triangles. But, you know, I had enough quilts like that. Like I had a ton. I've done that for years and years that I got over that because I already know specifically what I'm doing. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You can totally do that. But I already know specific quilts that I'm making and things like that. And it just didn't really fit into that. You know, and I kept saving them. And I don't have a lot of storage space. And so I just kind of, again, had to pick and choose. Pick my battles, right? Okay, so now I like to use the side of the iron to open these up. Like that. And then just throw a clapper on. Again, do that. I think I will have plenty of room that I don't need to make a clapper sandwich, but there's nothing wrong with that if I needed to. And so, yeah, this isn't my only ironing surface. I have plenty of ironing surfaces for all the tasks that I need to, plus to take ironing boards on a retreat and things like that. So let's just let that cool down for a minute, and while we're letting that cool down, I'm going to go ahead and sew this into a row. Okay, I'm just going to add the other rectangle on the other side. Grab another background and another 2.5 inch square. And then I'll take these over. I'll set the seams real quick on both seams. Then I'll open that up as well. Okay. So now I've got these. I'm going to pull my mat in. I could still just use this on a smaller mat, but I had pulled this mat in because I was using bigger, bigger blocks. And just to show you. Okay, so I can see I'm going to have to trim that off a little bit. And so what I do is I just line up these center lines right here. And whatever is hanging over past that, see, just that one little bit, I just go ahead and make sure my lines are all still centered and it didn't get moved when I moved my mat. And just trim that off. Okay, one last side. All right, so that one's good to go. We're just going to do this real quick. That one moved a little bit, but it didn't move. I cut it before it moved, so okay, I don't need to do anything on that side. Little teeny bit sticking out there, and just a little corner right here. So when I'm making my quilts, I do things a lot in stages, meaning I'm usually not making just one block at a time, unless I'm doing a sampler quilt or something. But I will get to the point where I do a lot of segments that I want to trim up and check, and then I have a whole pile of them that I just do at the same time. So, this looks like it takes a lot of time, but remember, I'm just doing this for one at a time. Whoops, I forgot to check that one last side. I'm just doing this for one at a time, but one block at a time, which happens to be four segments, so that's nice. But usually I'll have a big stack, and then I'll just do this task, and I like to enjoy the process along the way, and I'll have a movie on, or listening to a book, or listening to some music or something like that when I'm doing this, and it's just it's just not a chore to me. And I think it's important that we learn to enjoy each step of quilting. Of course, we're always going to have our favorites, right? Okay, so now I know those are good to go. And I'm going to, this is an important part, and I always make a mistake if I don't do this. So that's why I'm always saying that I like to lay them out this way, the way that they're supposed to go. So I just make sure that it's going the correct direction, and just assume, not just assume that I'm going to take it to my machine correctly. So lay it out and give it a quick check like that. And now I know that, oh, let me grab this, Cass. Sorry. Let me put this in the middle. So now I know all I have to do is sew this, you know, these 2 rows together, and then sew the entire block together and press the seams open. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back with that finished. Alrighty, okay, here we've got the finished block, and this is what it looks like on the back. So these are still pressed open. I mean, excuse me, towards the triangle, and everything else is pressed open, and it's nice and flat. And now here comes the test. The 10.5 inch ruler. And what I do is I find the lines that it needs to line up with. This fabric is nice and dark, so it helps to, so that's what I line up, you know, first there. So that looks good. And then I look at the edges here and see if there's any sticking over, or if it's like way under or anything like that. And it looks really good. And so I'm happy about that. No trimming on that one. And because we already kind of, you know, trimmed at this point, we could have sewn them together and then trimmed these outside ones, but I wanted to make sure that I got any inside little points that needed to be trimmed off. And so let's stick that over here. I'm pretty happy about that. I love this block. This is number 10, Hometown block, and in the 10.5 inch right now, and 5.5 inch right now, but they'll both finish, you know, 1/2 inch smaller once you sew it into your quilt because of your seam allowances. So we've got a stack of that, and then I'm going to talk to you about what I talked to you about last time, the alternate blocks. Okay, so for the alternate blocks, I just cut with the fabric and cut 5.5 inch squares using my cutting ruler, my 5.5 inch cutting ruler. And for each width of fabric, I can get 13 of these. And so I'm just going to give you some quilty math. We are going to need, for that alternate blocks, we're going to need 221 alternate blocks, okay? So the size of the quilt is going to be 105 by 105. And that means I'm going to do a row of 21 blocks across and 21 blocks down, because as I talked before, I make square quilts for my beds. And the first row is going to start off like this. Just pretend this is 21 with the alternate block in the top corners, okay? And then the second row will start with the piece blocks next, alternating. And then the third row will, you know, you just go on down. So when there's 21 rows, and that's why it has to end in an odd number. If there was 20 rows, then you wouldn't end with an alternate block. I hope that makes sense. So it's just like this is odd, a 3 by 3. That's what it's going to look like, but times it 21 by 21, all right? And then I'm going to be sewing these blocks together, and I'll talk about more of that later. But I wanted to let you know that what I did, let's see, I wrote my notes down here. For the alternate blocks, you need 2 3/4 yard of fabric, and you need to cut 17 widths of fabric and cut 13 from each of those. And so I just wanted to show you, this is the fabric that I decided to use. It's in the color Leaf, and it's called Hometown Foreman, Leaf Hometown Foreman. So that's what I decided to use for my alternate. But any of these, you know, I could have used denim, I could have used red, I could have used a green, a pink, a yellow, whatever you want to use, or even this other one right here. But I decided I liked all the softer colors in that, and I just really wanted the vintage look for my bed. And so I'll pick one of these prints for the binding. I'm not sure which one, but something that has one of these colors in it I'll pick for the binding. And so that's the yardage for the alternate blocks. Now for the yardage for the background, remember I'm using this background right here for all of these blocks right here. And so for the 10 blocks that we have done so far, for 16 of the 10 blocks, 16 each of the 10 blocks, it took 4 yards of fabric, of the background fabric. So because I'm going to be designing 4 more blocks and making 16 each of those, I'm going to need another couple yards. So get 6 yards of background for the entire quilt. And then, let's see, what did I tell you? 2 3/4 yards of the alternate, okay? And then for the binding, you need 7/8 of a yard for the binding because it is a king size quilt, okay? So I hope that gives you enough yardage wise. And of course for the blocks, we're just using scraps. Or, you know, you can start out with a fat quarter bundle of Hometown if, you know, like I did, if you're doing that. And then, let's see, what else did I want to say about that? So let's see, Cass is going out of town next week. So on November 7th is when I will have block number 11. And so I've designed 4 more blocks, and I will start with that on November 7th. We'll do block number 11, and we'll talk more about the quilt as we go along. Now that this quilt, the tutorials for that quilt is finished, we will, you know, just talk about the king size quilt. I'll also talk about the bonus quilt that I've been working on as well. All right, so I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and I'll chat with you later.